Let me ask you something. What if the man who told you God loved you was the very man God needed to protect you from? What if the preacher who healed your broken family was quietly destroying someone else's child behind closed iron gates? What if the church that gave you hope was the machine that made monsters? This is not a story about a fall from grace. This is a story about a man who was never standing where you thought he was. His name was Bishop Eddie Long. He built a kingdom on 240 acres of land in Lithonia, Georgia. At its peak, 25,000 people walked through his doors every Sunday. 4 American presidents sat in his sanctuary. He preached at Coretta Scott King's funeral. He shook hands with Tony Blair. He had a direct line to the White House. He drove a Bentley. He wore Rolex watches. He called himself a CEO, not a shepherd. And behind his $1.4 million gated mansion on Hunt Valley Drive, hidden inside decades of sealed courthouses, IRS lien documents, and the scarred memories of young men who once called him Daddy, was the truth. A truth so heavy that even the people who loved him the most couldn't carry it after he was gone. By the time this story ends, you will understand exactly what was hidden inside Bishop Eddie Long's empire. And I promise you, it was never gold. Stay with me, because this one goes deep. If you're new here, subscribe right now. We cover stories like this every week. Stories about power, deception, and the truth that powerful people tried to bury. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell. You don't want to miss what's coming. Before the Bentley, before the cathedral, before the gold chains and the stadiums full of people chanting his name, there was a little boy in Huntersville, North Carolina, who couldn't make his daddy proud. Eddie Lee Long was born on May 12, 1953. His father was Reverend Floyd Long, Jr., a Baptist minister, a man who preached love to strangers every Sunday and, according to everything we know about Eddie Long's trajectory, gave very little of that love to his own son at home. Let that land for a second, because the entire psychology of what Bishop Eddie Long became is rooted in that wound. When a child grows up watching their father wield authority like a weapon, watching him be revered by the world while feeling invisible at home, that child doesn't just grow up. They grow hungry. Hungry for approval. Hungry for power. Hungry to one day stand somewhere so high that no one, not even their father, could ever look down on them again. Eddie Long studied business at North Carolina Central University. He took a corporate job as a sales representative for Ford Motor Company, learning how to charm people, how to read a room, how to close, because make no mistake, before Eddie Long was a preacher, he was a salesman. Then he enrolled at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta. He wanted the pulpit. He wanted the authority his father wore so casually, and he was going to take it. But here's what almost nobody in his megachurch ever knew. Before Bishop Eddie Long stood at the altar with his beloved Vanessa, before the grand wedding, before the matching rings, before the public declarations of faith and family, he had already been married. In 1981, Eddie Long married a woman named Deborah Houston. The marriage lasted 4 years, and when it ended, the divorce papers were sealed in Fulton County Courthouse, buried there for nearly 3 decades, until reporters from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution finally dug them up. What those papers revealed was not a quiet parting of ways. In a counterclaim filed during the divorce proceedings, Deborah alleged that Eddie had, in her words, a violent and vicious temper. She stated that he beat her with his fists when she was 7.5 months pregnant. She said she and her son had to flee the family home in Fairburn, Georgia, to ensure their safety. Long's attorney, Craig Gillen, would later call those allegations absolutely not true. But the papers existed. The courthouse had them. And for 30 years, nobody was talking about them. The son from that first marriage, Edward Long, grew up to become the youth director at New Birth Missionary Baptist Church, Think about that, Eddie Long's own son. Inside the building, watching everything unfold from the inside out. That detail matters more than it seems right now. It will matter a great deal before this story is over. By 1987, Eddie Lee Long walked into New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Lithonia, Georgia. He was 33 years old. He had a hidden first marriage, a sealed courthouse, a wound from his father that had never been properly dressed, and he had 300 congregation members waiting for a leader. What they got was something else entirely. New Birth was dying when Eddie Long arrived. 300 members, a modest building. A congregation that didn't know it was about to become the foundation of one of the largest black megachurches in American history. Within a few years, Eddie Long didn't just grow that church, he transformed it. And the way he did it is a masterclass in understanding what happens when a wounded person discovers they have charisma. He preached the prosperity gospel, the idea that God's favor shows up in material blessings, that your faith determines your finances, that the man behind the pulpit is the living proof, and he backed it up with his body. Bishop Eddie Long did not look like a traditional preacher. He was built like a heavyweight boxer. He wore shirts that hugged his chest. He stacked gold chains over his clergy collar. He flashed a Rolex when he raised his hand to bless the offering. He was performative in a way that felt revolutionary inside black evangelical culture. And it worked. 25,000 members at the peak, 240 acres of land, a $50 million cathedral built to hold 10,000 worshipers in a single service. In 2005, he told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and I need you to hear this quote, he said they were not just a church, but an international corporation. He said he dealt with the White House, with Tony Blair, with presidents around the world. He held Coretta Scott King's funeral in 2006. 4 American presidents sitting in his sanctuary. His ministry received a $1 million federal grant under President George W. Bush's faith-based initiative. But there was a doctrine underneath all of this that nobody was examining closely enough. He boasted publicly that mothers brought their grown sons to him for paddling. He said that when he told them to bend over, even on a Sunday, they would bend over. He said it was because they respected him, because he had died for them first. Ride that slowly. He compared his authority over grown men to the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And his congregation, thousands of them, stood up and applauded. In December of 2004, Long led roughly 10,000 people on a march from the Martin Luther King Center toward Turner Field in support of a state constitutional ban on same-sex marriage. The Southern Poverty Law Center labeled him as one of the most virulently homophobic black leaders in America. And here's where the psychology becomes unbearable to sit with. Because the man who was publicly crusading against homosexuality, the man building his entire brand on masculine dominance, traditional family values, and heterosexual authority, was quietly operating something called the Longfellows Youth Academy, a program for fatherless boys. He pulled in young men who had no daddies at home. He offered to be the daddy they had been praying for. And 4 of those boys were about to walk into a lawyer's office and change everything. September 2010. The lawsuits started landing, one after the other. Like dominoes that couldn't stop falling, Maurice Robinson. 20 years old, Anthony Flagg. 21 years old, Jamal Paris. 23 years old, Spencer Legrand. 22 years old. They filed in DeKalb County, and the language inside those complaints was specific enough to make your stomach drop. They alleged that Bishop Eddie Long used his spiritual authority to coerce them into sexual relationships that began when they were teenagers. Jamal Paris said he was 14 years old when he first met the bishop. Ann Long told him to call him Daddy. Spencer Legrand said he was 15 when he met the bishop in Charlotte. after a sermon about fathers. Long looked him in the eye and said, "I got you. I will be your dad." The boys called this the spiritual son designation, and it came with everything a fatherless teenager could ever want: cars, jewelry, designer clothes, electronics, apartments, tuition checks, salaries on the church payroll. He gave them the world, and while he was giving it, he was also isolating them from everyone else in their lives. Paris described how Long would tell them they weren't allowed to talk to females. He would let the people in their old lives believe these boys had simply abandoned their families. He was building a wall, brick by brick, around each one of them. Then the boys described a ceremony. Candles were lit, jewelry was exchanged, vows were spoken. Scripture was read while the candles burned all the way down. Their attorney, B.J. Bernstein, described it in plain language. She called it, essentially, a marriage ceremony. The trips read like a luxury travel brochure: Kenya, South Africa, Honduras, the Bahamas, Trinidad, New Zealand. Spencer Legrand said that when he was 17 years old, in a hotel room in Nairobi, jet-lagged and exhausted, the bishop urged him to take a sleep aid, and what followed that night was kissing and physical contact he never asked for. He was 17. In a foreign country, alone with a man who had told him 2 years earlier, "I got you. I will be your dad." Then B.J. Bernstein released the photographs. Bishop Eddie Long, posing in what appears to be a bathroom, in a tight red muscle shirt. The photos had been sent from his personal BlackBerry in November 2008, signed, Eddie L. Long. Amazed by his grace, Bernstein stood in front of the cameras and asked a question that should never have needed asking. She said, "What pastor in his right mind sends a picture of himself posing in his bathroom in a muscle shirt to a young man?" No one in that room had an answer. A fifth young man, Santino Kemp, never sued. But he joined the settlement. He had Long's name tattooed on his wrist. The testimony that Jamal Paris gave to Fox 5 Atlanta is one of the most devastating pieces of video I have ever watched. He looked directly into the camera. He did not blink. He said, "A man cannot look me in my eye and tell me that they did not live this pain." He said, "You are not a man. You are a monster." He said he couldn't get the sound of the bishop's voice out of his head. He said he couldn't take enough showers to get the smell of that man off his body. He was 23 years old when he said that. He had been carrying it since he was 14. On September 26, 2010, Bishop Eddie Long walked into his pulpit, and he delivered the line the internet will never forget. He looked out at thousands of standing, cheering congregation members, and he said, "I feel like David against Goliath, but I've got 5 rocks, and I haven't thrown one yet." The sanctuary erupted. They gave him a standing ovation. He never threw a single rock. By May of 2011, the lawsuits were quietly settled out of court. The terms were sealed. The money changed hands. And the silence that Eddie Long purchased with that settlement would slowly suffocate him for the next 6 years. If this story is hitting different, if you feel it, hit that like button right now. It helps more people find this video. And subscribe if you haven't already. We're not done. The worst part of this story is still coming. Here's what I need you to understand. The scandal with the young men, as devastating as it was only one layer of what Bishop Eddie Long was hiding, because while those lawsuits were working their way through the courts, investigators were already following a paper trail that exposed something equally staggering. The man of God had been using God's house like a personal ATM. Let me walk you through it. In 1997, New Birth Church gifted land to a charity called Bishop Eddie Long Ministries. In 1998, that charity took out a $1, $16 million mortgage and used it to purchase the property at Hunt Valley Drive, the fortress, the gated mansion, the Bentley in the driveway. Then on Christmas Eve of 2003, And this is the move that should have triggered every alarm bell in every nonprofit watchdog office in the country. The property was transferred out of the charity and directly into Eddie Long's personal name. The same day, a $300,000 loan was taken against it. 3 more mortgages would follow. Then in 2006, the property was quietly deeded back to the church. Moved in, moved out, used as collateral, mortgaged repeatedly. When Eddie Long was eventually asked about the relationship between himself and Bishop Eddie Long Ministries, he testified under oath. Basically, Bishop Eddie Long Ministries was Bishop Eddie Long. He said it himself, under oath. In plain language, the charity was not a charity. The charity was him. WSB-TV reporter Jody Fleischer found that the church had paid roughly $200,000 in property taxes on the bishop's personal home and nearly $85,000 on his private jet. Between 1997 and 2000 alone, the charity transferred more than $3 million in salary, benefits, and property to Eddie Long personally. Senator Chuck Grassley opened a Senate Finance Committee investigation into 6 televangelists. Eddie Long was one of them. And then there was Ephraim Taylor. Bishop Eddie Long stood in his own pulpit and introduced this man to his entire congregation. He called Taylor his friend, his brother. He told his members that everything Ephraim said was based on the Word of God. He told them to trust him. What Long apparently had, but chose to ignore, was an internal church memo warning New Birth leadership. Taylor intended to take advantage of congregation members. The introduction happened anyway. More than a dozen church members lost over $1 million in what turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. Ephraim Taylor was sentenced in March 2015 to 19 years and 7 months in federal prison. The congregation lost their money. Taylor lost his freedom. And the bishop who vouched for him never fully answered for the role he played. In August of 2016, a video surfaced online of Bishop Eddie Long working out at a gym. And the man in that video was unrecognizable. He was gaunt, hollowed out. The powerful frame he had spent decades building into a symbol of God's favor. The body he used as a billboard for the prosperity gospel had disappeared. He told his congregation he was on a raw vegan diet, that he had rejected what he called the slave menu. He said he was going to live to be 100 years old. A month later, the story changed. A church spokesman quietly admitted there was a health challenge. By December, Long was completely bald and visibly frail. He stood before his congregation and told them he was ignoring their phone calls because everybody wanted to ask questions, and he didn't want to rehearse facts. The rumors began to spread. Gospel singer Kim Burrell publicly connected his decline to the sexual abuse allegations. She said that no one would be saying certain things about him unless a man had come forward and revealed what happened behind closed doors. The speculation took on a life of its own. Bishop Eddie Long died on January 15, 2017. He was 63 years old. The church issued a statement saying only that he had succumbed after a gallant private fight with an aggressive form of cancer. He never publicly addressed the conspiracy theories. He never publicly apologized to the young men. He never threw his 5 rocks. His funeral lasted 6 hours. Deion Sanders, who had known the bishop personally, broke down in tears and told the crowd that Eddie Long had been a father figure to him, and that perhaps they had been wrong about this man. Eddie Long was laid out in an off-white robe. A gold cross rested on his chest, rings on his fingers. His daughter Taylor wrote publicly that she loved him and thanked him for being perfect. Months after the bishop was buried, months after the flags were folded and the condolence cards stopped coming, a federal document arrived at the DeKalb County Courthouse. The Internal Revenue Service had filed a lien against the late Bishop Eddie Long and his widow Vanessa, the amount $335,260. The document stated there was a lien in favor of the United States on all property and rights to property belonging to the taxpayer. The same bishop who drove a Bentley off the lot of his Lithonia mansion while reporters chased him for answers, his widow was now being chased by the IRS. New Birth Missionary Baptist Church, the Kingdom Eddie Long, built from 300 members, was reportedly carrying a debt of $31 million by the time his successor took the pulpit. Membership had quietly shrunk from 25,000 to roughly 10,000. The succession fell apart almost immediately. Bishop Stephen Davis took over after Long's death. He served without a salary for his entire tenure. He personally gave the church his own money to keep the lights on. He resigned after 16 months. He later said publicly that corrupt leaders and wicked men had forced him out. Edward Long, the bishop's own son from his first marriage, the boy who grew up fatherless and then watched his father from inside the building, was passed over for the senior pastor role. Twice, the mansion on Hunt Valley Drive is still standing. The gates are still there. The Bentley is gone. The bishop is gone. The empire is half the size it used to be. Here's the truth about what was hidden inside Bishop Eddie Long's mansion. There was no secret room, no buried chest, no gold. What was hidden was a doctrine that said, if a man is powerful enough and charismatic enough and drives the right car and quotes the right scripture and stands tall enough behind a pulpit, then you don't ask questions. You just applaud. The mansion was the proof of the doctrine. The IRS lien was the receipt. And the young men, Maurice, Anthony, Jamal, Spencer, Santino, they were the cost of a kingdom that was never built for God. The cost of a man who needed to be bigger than his father so badly that he consumed everything around him to get there. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think, made you feel something, made you question something, then do me one thing, drop a comment below. Tell me which part of this story hit you the hardest. Was it the sealed divorce records? The IRS lien? The testimony from Jamal Paris? The 5 Rocks line? Tell me. And if you want more stories like this, stories about power, deception, and the truth that doesn't stay buried forever, subscribe to this channel. Hit that bell. We post every week because there are more stories where this one came from, and somebody needs to tell them. Subscribe for more stories like this. Like if this opened your eyes. Comment, what part hit you hardest?